you just simply will never have enough money to have a better performing website than Facebook. Never going to happen. Forget about it, right? Not even, you won't even come within a mile of being as usable and quick and fast loading and just a joy to experience. And a lot of people don't associate their social media platforms that they use with like usability or fun or, you know, like just really easy to use because it's so easy to use that they don't even notice it. You know?
Right.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I am your co-host, Circa. With me is, as always, is my co-host, Corinne Campbell. How's it going, Corinne?
I'm doing real good today. I have power today. I live in a historic neighborhood, and yesterday, a truck that was too tall, God forbid, drove down a street, and we were out of power for like 5 hours.
I hate it when trucks drive down streets.
I'm saying, right? Like, what the heck? So, yeah, I'm doing a lot better now that I have power.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, before we get started today's kind of a bit of a lofty topic. We did a lot of talking over the last 3 episodes about kind of what your artist website needs, a lot of pitfalls we see artists running into when they design their websites and how you can fix them, and then also kind of how to just, you know, swallow the pill and build your website on WordPress, which is probably the best long-term solution for your website over, you know, any other builder, just because it's got so much flexibility. And now I feel like we've done all of our homework and we can kind of like just party for this episode. And
I'm for partying.
And as total nerds, we're going to party about a bit of a nerdy topic. But before we do that, I just want to say that Corinne and I will both be at CD Baby DIY Musician Conference August 16th through the 18th. And if you are in the Austin, Texas area, or you plan to be in that time, or you just want to make the trip, we will be leading a 3-hour intensive pretty much a training. We're going to do a live training on digital marketing for independent musicians to kind of, I guess, open up the DIY Musician Conference. So I'm very excited about that. And you guys can go. Where can they go, Corinne, to get tickets?
DIY Music Con, if you Google
.com.
it. But .com, yeah, I think.
Rock. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's
Google it,
Yeah.
though. CD Baby DIY Musician Conference is the whole name. But also,
and as always,
we've been...
you can go to the show notes, entrepreneur.io/episode 97 to get a link to that.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm excited to see what happens. I mean, we are, like Cirque said, the very first in the lineup. So it should be, you know, I hope we don't melt everyone's brains like right off the key, you know, first thing in the day. But I'm really excited about it because it gives us an opportunity to like get kind of deeper into things in one session. So if you're like already at the medium level, you know, maybe you don't have to come to the first one, but either way, you know, we're going to do this whole thing and then like hang out after and get to meet a bunch of people. And I think, you know, that's something contrary to Cirque's recent video about networking. We do still love to meet indies. So
yeah, I'll meet
we'd love to
indies
meet you if you're
day.
there. Yeah, exactly. So come on up and chat with us. But yeah, so I'm stoked on it. It should be good.
Hell yeah. With that said, and you guys can definitely, once again, go to entrepreneur.io/episode 97 to get all the info about that event. And now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the death of websites. The death of websites is coming.
Of websites.
Yeah.
The fall of the empire.
Exactly. If the sensationalist headlines of notable brands like TechCrunch and Mashable are to be believed, the death of websites is coming. The start of which we were supposed to see last year in 2018. And continuing on in exponential fashion through the 2020s. And I just kind of really wanted to talk about that because it's something that's going to become more and more, I think it's going to hit the indie musician and the music industry community a lot quicker than it might hit other industries, because we are already an industry that is predisposed to outsourcing a lot of what we might build on a website to some third-party app or something like that. So I imagine like the second indies hear that they cannot have a website, they're gonna rush towards that. So we wanted to get out in front of it and kind of talk about the issue and really make you guys understand why they're proclaiming the death of websites and what it means.
Right. Well, and I think too, like you said, this is something that already I'll see musicians like only have an Instagram and like say, "Hey, do I even need a website?" And it's like, when Cirque told me we were going to talk about the death of websites, I was like, "Listen, we need to have a disclaimer here because the people who are already throwing away their website are we're not there yet where that makes sense,
Right. Yeah.
And it's usually because people are like, oh, I want to host my stuff on everybody else's stuff and I don't want to worry about it. So, obviously there's this like gray area, right? And I think part of the discussion about, what websites are supposed to be, I mean, the way it is, we're already talking indies away from, hey, you should have huge pictures of yourself and you should have all of, all of these things that they think is in a website. It's like, no, your website's, it can be pretty, but it's also utilitarian, right? It's supposed to be accomplishing things for you and your brand. And because so much of our brand is projected into all of these other places, these music distributors and these social platforms and whatever, it can be easy to think like, oh, well, I don't need anything on a site anymore. But there's still going to be things that you need a website to do, at least for the, short-term future for sure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in 2016, marketers were already proclaiming the death of email. The smart marketers were saying, guys, email's never going to die, but these chatbots are here now. But some people were saying, oh, email's dead. Is email dead? ? I probably said that. And email wasn't dead and isn't dead. It's just that some things that we sought a solution to through email ended up not having a long-term solution in email. And when chatbots came along, it was a natural segue to say, well, let's outsource those things to chatbots, which we're going to talk a little bit about in this discussion. But so websites aren't dead and probably won't die fully, but it is important to note how personal website property is going to change over the next 10 years and how that impacts the music industry, especially. And before we do that, we kind of want to take you guys through the groundwork, like how we got to today, because for the 90s, like I remember distinctly when I was like 9 or 10 years old, being in my dad is a lifelong kind of database and software engineer. And I was in his office when I was that age. And I would go to I think it was the Kellogg's or whatever their competitor is, their website. And it had all the children's cereal characters in like this interactive flash game that you could
like
play.
The leprechaun from Lucky Charms.
Exactly.
That's my favorite.
Yeah. And I would sit and play that flash game for like hours and hours. And that was an era where you really you would be on the internet looking for cool websites. Oh, what are some websites? You would have a list of maybe 100 websites that you thought were cool and you want to check out. And people would index these websites because the internet was still very disorganized. So there, all the cool stuff you could do online, it wasn't like there was 4 websites where you do everything like there is now. There was, way more, I would say, fragmentation of the internet. And there were pockets of cool everywhere. And there still is cool websites all over the place. Cool. Yeah. Exactly.
That's my next CD title. My next album is going to be Pockets of Cool.
That was my band name in high school. Yeah.
I love it.
And so, I just remember that era when it wasn't certain what websites you were going to go to. People visited all manner of websites, and websites were this personal artistic thing. For brands, they were a major, it wasn't like it is today where Google dictates what your website should look like in order for you to rank. Right. People would do all types of zany shit, you'd have a massive
and
splash
load time.
page. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
load time and design structure was the wild, wild west, man. And so
Yeah.
when the biggest reason why we make websites the way we do is because of consumer expectations, right? They
Right.
want things to load right now. They want it to be good on mobile. They want it to, like look certain ways. And like outside of putting like bright blue font on a red background, like in the late 90s and early thousands, you couldn't really fuck it up, because
Yeah.
people were not used to a standard. Now they're
Yeah.
so used to seeing digital media, whether it's video, photo. If people can see that things are photoshopped as complete amateurs who know nothing about photographs or Photoshop or anything,
Yeah.
And so websites, I think, are doing the same thing, right? Where now that people see things, even though they can't identify why something looks cooler or better than something else, they're so exposed to it that going to different websites isn't really interesting anymore. It's more of a utilitarian thing. And the way
Right.
they consume media is on their known channels, whether they're a Reddit fan, a YouTube fan, a Facebook fan, Instagram, and they'll go search their people on these platforms instead of like perusing the, the exploration of the former internet.
Yeah. And it was a time when like the internet was in such a state of infancy, even up to 1999 and 2000 and 2001, like that it wasn't a guarantee that you're a big brand. Well, it's not a guarantee that your website features a whole lot of information about your company or even a place to sign up for anything. Like forums were still in their infancy. E-commerce was not even a thing yet. It was very niche. Like it was very rare that you could transact online for a long period of time. And around 2000 is when we started rounding that corner. Forums became like very common on websites. Businesses started structuring their websites to have like their contact info, and then a blog. Blogs came out, like blogs started, and and like before that, go to any government website, any .gov website that isn't like federal. Go to your city's website, right? That's what the internet looked like.
Or federal, really.
Yeah, some of the like the USPTO.gov website. That's more like how websites looked back then. And if it was
like
going to be
healthcare.gov, the reason why that crashed when healthcare first went up is that they're like, ooh, we need to make this trendy so that young people like it too.
Yeah.
It was like, and it was a government site made to like look pretty, and it couldn't even function. And that was just a couple of years ago, It's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. And I think Amazon was like towards the end of the 90s, was in its infancy. And that's like when e-commerce really, so people started talking about e-commerce like it was how it is today. Because people always talk about things early and like overhype them before they're ready.
Yeah.
And so that people were talking about it in the way that it actually is today. But it wasn't like that. It was very primitive. And so you either had a website that was some sort of novelty experience, much like an album launch experience that we talk about, where someone is like interacting with a brand through this like game or tool or like utility, or it was a very dense, shitty looking, but tons of information, disorganized website. Like, you know what I mean? Like interlinking.
Like everything looked like eBay. Or like Craigslist. If you go to Craigslist, it's a nightmare. Because it's just indexes, right? But that's what the internet was, hyperlinks and non-hyperlink text. That's it. It's like, that's and the fact that transactions happened when the internet was in that stage is kind of bonkers, like
it's
how
nuts.
did anyone even trust that,
Yeah. It is pretty crazy to think about. And then this huge convergence happened in the early 2000s where Web 2.0 struck, which was like, okay, let's try to make this look less shitty, right? Like let's round some corners. Let's add some shadows, some gradients to the buttons,
I want a drop shadow on all my stuff right now.
Exactly. And then iconography became a big thing. Like the app icons on your phone. People really like favicons became a thing, right? Like what your logo was going to show up, in the browser and things like that. So that like this whole convergence of, okay, well, both we want it to look better, but also we want to be able to transact on it. And there should be a normalized sort of how websites look, like a shrunken white Elements of style for the internet, right?
Right.
And that was largely driven by Google and all the buzz about e-commerce and social media websites, which is kind of us transitioning from that era where the internet was disorganized to the beginning of the end for personal websites, which was the establishment of Google website structure, formalized website structure, and Web 2.0 / social media.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny because like a lot of sites, like you can just Google like Netscape Navigator, right?
Yep.
And like that is what websites look. That's what I used to see websites, And I think that there's something where, and this is like the birth of Wix, right? And the birth of Squarespace after that. And, is that people started to want to have pages for like when they get engaged, right? And like their registry and stuff like that. And like the not.com was like one of the first places where you could like build, an ode to your coming, celebration, whatever thing.
Yeah.
So like, I think there was stuff like that, like kind of rising from the ashes around the same time that social media started to, MySpace started to, explode, and people were like trying to sell profile formats, and the photos that go into that stuff. And I think like that is when, for me, that's a significant time in our history, because that's when, as a consumer, we started to shift into thinking about things need to be custom for me. Like now you can buy vitamins and hair products and get your gene counts and you know what I mean? And everything is 100% customized to you. But this is really where the birth of that began. And before that, the internet was a source of like information, right? And so like political movements and underground guerrilla tactics and things were more where the internet was hanging out. And then it just grew into a more consumer level consumption.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that like all the preamble to this era of when we saw this divergence, right? It was already there. Like users, like the internet browsers who were very savvy, were using like Usenet groups to socialize. Right. And like IRC chats, right? And instant chat on websites. And then if you wanted to represent yourself as an individual in the context of a larger brand or a larger ecosystem, you would be on a website's message board. Some websites were just message boards. Message boards predated social media and social media user profiles. But what you would see is these users, they wanted to like communicate with each other and communicate around central topics, but they also wanted to show who they were. And you would see that by these big, elaborate, hard-coded signatures on their message board posts. They would have people with like page-long signatures with GIFs and and all these designed banners and stuff. And that was, you could see that people wanted to represent themselves, but didn't want to build a website. And so that's when the internet split off into, okay, the people who want to actually go so far as to develop their own website, you're going this way. You're going to design your website according to what Google wants it to be designed as. You want to rank for Google. And these people, MySpace, Friendster, we're going to start giving you the power to represent yourself and communicate socially on our platform.
Right. Yeah, it's so crazy to even just think about that time, man, when like chat rooms, because if like you go on like Reddit or, even forums, I think if there's anything that eBay is a little frozen in time as far as I'm concerned. If you Google like eBay in 2004, it's not going to look as different as everything else. Right. But something that is really frozen in time from my perspective is forums, right? Which is exactly where these signature blocks lie. That
message boards don't look much different today than they did back then.
No, which actually, we can unpack that at another time. But I'd be interested to see how we could be the people who changed the expectation of forums. But in any way, like that is where people started to like they were voicing their opinions on a topic, and then integrating their personality into the rest of their signature, right? So almost they were building this basis of context. And I think that's where psychologically we started to get really primed for, MySpace, but then also into Facebook and where we are with socials now, in that you want to not only have your piece and say your piece, but be able to set up a visual context so that when somebody reads your tweet, right, and they go to your profile, there are things there that indicate who you are, and what context this sentence was said in. And I think that's where people were like, a social profile or a MySpace profile isn't even enough for me.
Right.
I
need a whole website.
Like show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need a whole website dedicated to the context of what I'm saying.
And it's like, look at all the convergence there, right? First of all, like you can automatically see, okay, all of a sudden people are designing their own websites, not just for like their business or their personality, but for their wedding. Like websites become incredibly democratized and a large group of people want to design their own websites. But for the people who don't, for the people who are like, I'm not going to go so far as to set up a website. I just want to communicate with friends, represent myself digitally. Okay, you get a social media profile. Now those two things are almost diametrically opposed, even back in the 2010s, but it's very difficult to notice until we get to where those user profiles start to have the same functionality as a website. And we'll get to that. But not only that, you also see that, okay, all these people who used to communicate on message boards and share information rapidly, that style didn't die out. It just ended up on Reddit. And what's the fastest dissemination of information on the internet? What is the front page of the internet? Reddit, right? Because it's it's the base layer. It doesn't have all these.
Or Twitter.
Right. That's very similar. Yeah. It's almost just as fast, right?
Twitter's OG for me too. Just as much.
Yeah. But it's just crazy that to look at it and say, yeah, that's the base layer. That was always around. It doesn't have all these complex abstractions on top of it, so it runs faster.
Right.
It's just interesting. But yeah, so around the 2010s, or I'm sorry, early 2000s, with the advent of MySpace, a whole generation, right, became of the opinion that they could represent themselves digitally. They had that faculty, and that was made possible by MySpace and then later disrupted by Facebook.
Right. Dude, I remember like the way, just like, for example, if you follow any makeup gurus on YouTube like I do, James Charles had this drama, right, about 2 months ago where he was losing subscribers. Like he lost 3 million subscribers in the course of a few days, right? Which for a YouTube channel is like cray. And all of these different outlets were reporting on how, people unfollowed him, right? Like Ariana Grande unfollowed him, and that was significant. And all of these different brands and people who like unfollowed him or followed them back, or didn't have reciprocal following, right? And like that, it's crazy that still exists too, because like the top 8 friends on MySpace, right? Like people were manipulating other people through these means as early as that. If you got in a fight with your friend and they took you off their top 8, it was like, whoa. Like things are serious. Or like if you unfriended someone on Facebook, which people still do now, but even at the beginning of Facebook, it was significant that you made some kind of statement through the actions on this platform. Like it started to impact real life, right? And I think in chat rooms and on Reddit, even though you wanted to like kind of project this personality, there was still more anonymity than when we started to graduate into Friendster, MySpace, Facebook, because you could make a fake profile if you wanted true anonymity. But most people were now, having their real life and their online life converge, which, that was a significant change. And I think that psychologically set them up for conducting life online the way we do now.
Right. Once you set up the foundational prism through which to view this, which is once we created a digital world, it was necessary for all physical manifestations to also have a digital representation. So you are a physical manifestation, your social life is, and one way or another, it was going to end up with a digital representation. And And through that, you can explain a lot of the phenomena. Why did Facebook beat out MySpace? Well, MySpace tried to outsource the innovation of its ecosystem to its users. Look at any government that has ever tried to outsource the innovation of the ecosystem entirely to its users, right? It falls apart.
Right.
And so Facebook kind of stepped in and was like, well, we need to have some, leadership role in this. We're going to develop and foster an ecosystem and set up some boundaries for users. And I didn't mean for that to be a political statement, if anyone's nerdy enough to worry that it was, but
we're gonna get the emails now, sir. Great job.
yeah, I just meant to say that. It's just interesting that Facebook won and MySpace was really like, hey, here's your user profile. Here's how our system works. You make it cooler than it is. Facebook was like, here's your user profile. You can't do much with it, but we're about to make it a whole lot cooler. And I think that's a fundamental difference between the two. And it was, again, a further divergence of those who wanted full control over their digital presentation, their digital presence, and those who wanted a bit of the burden of representing themselves digitally outsourced to a larger corporation that had more resources.
Absolutely. Well, it's just amazing to think about the things that we're cool with doing online now, right?
Yeah.
And there are still things even now we're impressed. We're like, oh, we can, when ManyChat started to come up with their payment gateway, right? Where they could use Facebook to pay you for products. We're like, whoa. But in reality, I think that technology has kind of held back, right? Because they're waiting for people to catch up with the capability of technology now. And so they're like, well, we're not going to, especially somebody like Facebook who's responsible, right? Or more responsible in their development than MySpace, for example, right? Like MySpace would have been like, yeah, you want to put a PayPal button? Have at it. Put it on your profile. Like rip people off, whatever. It's through PayPal. Like it's your problem. And with Facebook, they're kind of like, all right, we're going to roll this out in a way that, everybody's going to complain for the first month of this new feature, and then they're going to love it. And it's going to replicate real life faster and faster, with these like one little step at a time, which so it makes sense that Facebook would win in that category because as much as people wanted to replicate real life online, the way like we don't go to the store now, we shop on Amazon and have it shipped to us. Right. Like the more that people were comfortable with that, Facebook's like, we're going to roll it out one little bit at a time. I think that's probably why they won.
I think, and it's a game that they're playing. The game is, like if you look at the spectrum from IRC chat, which is the lowest resolution representation of the physical manifestation it's trying to emulate, which is like normal social interaction between you and a friend or you and a colleague, that it's trying to replicate that with super low resolution. Brands don't want to play with it because it's risky. It's like, it's not there yet. Brands aren't that in companies and in commerce, which is a big thing. Like you might think, oh, users bring brands. Like if there's enough users, the brands will come. But the obverse is also true.
Right.
When brands see that a technology or a thing is like, okay, we can transact in this ecosystem now. That's also the point at which a lot of users, like the middle of the adoption curve, starts to feel comfortable with it as well. So it's you can't really extricate them. It's the chicken or the egg situation. And you look at like as the ecosystem developed and Facebook set up some borders and Twitter set up some borders for how we were going to operate and make this digital representation more and more high resolution, and video came on board and photo and the news feed, which is sort of like the word on the street if you think about it. Brands started to say, hey, I want to now represent my physical manifestation, my company, in this digital ecosystem. And I want tools to be able to do it. And that's when Facebook and Twitter and all these companies were able to say, aha, we have a revenue model. These brands want to play in our digital representation of social life. They're going to have to pay for it, but we need to onboard them first. So it will give it to them for free for a period of time. And once that really locked in, because you see brands had to have websites and didn't want to play on Friendster and didn't want to play on MySpace. So they had websites. And I told you about that divergence of website or user profile. Which one do I want? What level of customizability am I comfortable with? And then you take that and the divergence splits and the fork becomes even wider. And now brands start to jump from the website side over to the user profile side and play on both sides, which gave validity to just like, oh, I mean, I could probably just have a user profile, even if I'm a brand. That started to become a conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it's like you go where the people are, right? Like you can't build it and they will come. If you build an amazing, perfect website and there's no one there, even if it just exists online, it's not going to do anything by itself. Right.
Right.
And I think more and more brands are starting to realize like, oh, well, there's, maybe it was hundreds of thousands at the time of people over here on Facebook. They're having conversations. They're replicating their real life. So what if I could, like, if it's Best Buy, right? They're like, well, these people are never coming, they're not coming to Best Buy as often as we would like them. So what if we just show up
Right.
and we're present in the same place where they're starting to replicate their life digitally? And that's exactly, that's what they were hoping to do with their website, but it was at the time, it was free, to do it on Facebook, where they already were. So why would you take them somewhere else?
And at first it wasn't like, oh, we should have our store or our company represented on this social media platform necessarily. It was, the conversation was more like, hey, all the people are on that social media platform and we could steal some of them if we get signed up. We steal them over to our website. Seriously, they didn't necessarily want to be on Facebook or want to be on Twitter. Insofar as it was a smart business decision, they wanted the traffic from those platforms, which is where all the traffic started going, because the average person, most people, a crushing majority of them, don't want to build a website. So they're going to build a user profile on a social media platform to fulfill a lot of the same things a personal website might. And now that they're all there, because a majority of them want to be there rather than have a website, we need to get them from there to our company's website. So let's start being a citizen of that digital world. But that's one of the main reasons why now people are starting to say that websites might not be such a thing as they've been over, throughout the 2010s in the 2020s, is because this is the primary reason, is that it's a cost that is unnecessary. Why move the traffic off of that platform if we're being given the option of doing all of our commerce and all of our digital representation on that platform and not having to do it on our website?
Right. Yeah, well, especially as more and more of these platforms are available globally, right? Like, it's not like you're going to be missing out on access to certain people because the majority of countries where there are internet users have access to these platforms.
Right.
And, in theory, your bases should be covered, right?
Yeah.
That ends up going back to the conversation we were having last week, which is like, these things do what I want them to, but do they do them in the way that I want them to?
Yeah.
And more, these social platforms are developing. They're like, oh, well, if commerce happens here, then they're going to put more ad dollars over here. Then and so they are trying to make it more customizable. And so in theory, this is something that pretty soon you could replicate the way you want to do things, not just making sales on Instagram, but selling them in the way that you want to, right? Without needing a website to do it. And that's kind of crazy to consider.
It's nuts. Yeah. And it's, but it makes a lot of sense when you start to, like, I'm glad we did this groundwork talk, because it's even clarifying it for me. Like, it's so obvious how and why this is happening now that you kind of look at it through that history of like, oh, okay, well, it's a constant war between should I have my own website or should I have a user profile? Wherever that user profile exists, in whatever era we are, that's the eternal struggle. And there's a lot of pros and cons to having a website, and a lot of those cons are now being made into pros by social media platforms. It's interesting to note that like
Right.
LinkedIn was one of the late social media platforms, and it also happens to be the one that brands talk to other brands on. Like these
Right.
digital representations of corporations talk to each other on. Because they're the
Mm,
last to want a user profile, because they have the resources to have their own website, and they can do commerce on their website before we were able to do commerce on social media. So of course they're going to be the last to social media in terms of like as a digital universe that exists. That said,
right.
the
Right.
second half of this podcast, we want to talk about the pros and cons of having a website and why those cons present, a pretty feasible argument that websites are definitely not going to be the same going forward, and how a lot of their functionality is going to be offloaded to social media behemoths. But before we do that, like, it's important to realize that the music industry hasn't been a part of any of what we've talked about thus far, except for Napster, which is really an anomalous in the context of what we've talked about so far. The advent of P2P downloading, like it was incidental that the music industry was caught up in that, right? Like it could have been video, but video files are larger. Like it
Right.
wasn't. It was because we had tiny files that weren't documents. That's why we were caught up in it. Not because like we're at
Well,
the
and
advent
because
of
there was kind of a monopoly on how it was being sold, right? Like
right. Well, that's the exact
iTunes
point. Is
and
that like
iPods.
the music industry never needed a website, because the music industry, as I've said before, fancies itself. Oh, way to go, Kenny. The music industry doesn't need a website because the music industry fancies itself business to business. We don't need to
Right.
go where customers are. Customers come to the people that we transact with. Tower Records back in the day, and then then like iTunes. Like iTunes builds the storefront. iTunes needs a website. We don't need a website. So the music
Right.
industry has never been a part of this conversation on either the user profile side or the website side. Like, artists have user profiles, but largely to communicate with fans, and in a tangential and sort of like pedantic way. Like they're not like, like they're not doing it in the same way that businesses are communicating.
Right.
So yeah, it's like this is probably going to a lot of the return to user profiles, a lot of like the offloading of what a website does back onto Facebook is going to largely miss a lot of the music industry, because they have terrible websites, and they never really set up the websites that transact appropriately, and they never realized
Right.
the need to transact, and they probably won't recognize that, oh, they can do everything they did on their website now on Facebook, because they're not doing it on their website now.
Dude, that's actually such a crazy like meta point because like we were talking last week about like or maybe the week before about what you don't need on your website. You don't need things on your website that are on your social channels, because firstly social is probably what brought you to the website, and secondly because like why have it in two places, right? And it's just ironic that now like the music industry kind of missed the boat on like what your website was supposed to be for anyway, and pretty soon we're going to be able to do more on social channels than ever before, negating the need for a website in many ways.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's just isn't like they missed it, like the whole 30-year range of needing a website the industry missed. It's like
Yeah.
that's crazy to me, but it's just
It's also a
it's
big
kinda it's
reason
just
why we have a music industry specific thing that provides user profiles. If you think about like, you don't want to build a
right.
website? Okay, great. You have a Facebook profile. We have our own. It's called a Spotify profile. Notice that it is way stupider than a Facebook profile in terms of like, functionality. Like it's dumb. It
Yeah.
doesn't do much.
Like you can't even put your website on it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So I mean, I think there's a point where, if the website starts to go away, I mean, even smart indies, like very few of them are, using their site the way like we would recommend, which is in a marketing way, and to do the things for your brand that need to happen that can't happen on socials, right? So gathering opt-ins and making sales and whatever. But so many sites don't do that the way it is, you know? So it would just be kind of ironic if we were like, your website should be doing these things. And like 3 years from now, you can completely do all the things on social platforms that you would ever do with a website, and it negates the need for it. Like, it'd just be pure irony that we missed the boat entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like you might ask yourself, if websites are going to move to social media platforms, why? And we'd like to provide that for you. First, I'd like to go over the pros of websites. The first of which, and probably like this pro is all of the pros within it, is it's decentralized. No one else owns it, right? Except for like, you could make an argument that like the powers that be that oversee internet protocol and the base layer of the internet do own it and you don't. But that's an abstraction to say the least. It is the most thing that you own on the internet. I'll say that. Which gives you unlimited design functionality. It allows you to say and do anything you want, even if it's racist. and there's, it can't be taken away from you. That's for better or worse, right? There's a lot of worse that, like we wish we could take it down, but it's better that it remain free. And then because it's decentralized and because you can do anything you want on it, you have both the burden and the opportunity of being completely responsible for privacy and tracking on the website. So you can
with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah. Which means you can put whatever tracking pixels you want on your website. You can track the use of users across your website, store that data, and make inferences upon it to impact your bottom line or make your business better. And on that note, the sales process can be optimized, which is a huge point of the design functionality of having a website. Is like, if I want Facebook to offer my products, for people to buy my products from me on Facebook, Facebook's controlling what that checkout experience is like, and it might not be so tight for the user, and I might lose customers because it's very confusing or it takes too much time. And I can control how much time it takes on my own website, even if it's shitty at first.
Right, exactly. And, like right now we're mad because a lot of website builders don't offer one-click upsell capability. Like, I doubt that Facebook will implement that before it could be implemented on a website, you know? So there, but I think that's the greatest point. The greatest point is that, when you have your things hosted, and this is the easy button for not just sales and commerce, but for the entire fan experience, right? Like if you build it through one of these builders, they're kind of putting all the controls in place so that you can't screw it up. And so that it looks more formula to everything else that's on the internet, So when you exercise your power, right, and your control, it also makes you responsible, right? So it puts you in a place where, people, if they have a complaint about the site or the checkout process, or even just how, fast or slow things are loading, you are 100% responsible, not only for fielding all of that feedback. They're not going to be like, oh, Facebook sucks because your video didn't show me, what I wanted. Like they're going to say you suck because your video didn't do what I wanted it to, or whatever. And then also like you have to field the complaints of it, right? Like you're the one who has to respond to these people. I can't imagine being a person at Facebook doing any kind of support, whether it's people who screen reported comments and profiles or people complaining about ads or whatever. Like, screw that noise, But if you have your own website, guess what? That's your job. Like, and I think that's something people don't think a whole lot about.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's there's a lot of cons of having a website. And those grow as these social media platforms get better. The cons of having a website actually grow. So, like, for instance, as I said before, the main goal of brands being on social media is to move that traffic over to their website where the commerce can occur. But if brands can do the same commerce and the same information walkthrough on a faster loading, more trustworthy, and happens to be where they already are place, they're going to do it there more and more over time as it gets better at commerce. So moving traffic from one place to another, like any traffic that comes to your website, especially in the beginning of you as a brand, is going to come from probably a social media platform. And why move it? Why move it if you don't have to?
Right. Why take on the work, the responsibility, the know-how, I think that's the way a lot of people feel about that, so yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like there's a comfort, even, artists will ask us about what we think about building, custom apps, as an artist, and like, dude, in 2000, whatever, 8, 9, whatever it was, when Reverb Nation was like, yeah, we'll make you your own app. I sure as hell did do that, paid them whatever it was, $150 for the year or whatever to have my stuff just populate into this formulae, right? And, my unique users for that app were not substantial, compared to everything else. And even though I like had content in there, that wasn't anywhere else, I didn't have any control to make that app anything special, right? So getting someone to download that app onto their phone, especially at a time when, the iPhone was only a couple of years old, right? And the Google Play Store was only a few years old. That was really tough to accomplish. It was a big ask to get somebody to just download my app specifically. So, and that's still true. Even though it's, there's more and more access for you to create an app and put it out, it's still very difficult to present, the marketing promise to your fan. Like, this is worth downloading because I've made it super tight, right? And like, it's worth having this extra space taken on your phone because my app is so cool. And they'd rather just stay in Instagram and Facebook that's already on their phone and see your stuff in a formula and a format that they're familiar with, and so more and more people are kind of getting over there, there's a con of not just the development, but also like I've seen people make websites that look like social platforms so that it looks like something people already know as a consumer. And it's like, well, why didn't you just put it over there then?
Yeah, it's like as these social media platforms get better at the things that companies typically do on their own website or even in their own phone support system, you're going to see a lot of the company's investment go towards building its presence there. And you're going to see more of the marketing funnel. Like we teach the buddy system. A good third of or I guess it would be more like a fourth of the buddy system occurs on a social media platform typically, not on your website. Right. And then it occurs on email and even Messenger. So, like up to half of the buddy system journey can occur on a social media platform. And once commerce gets really robust on Facebook, it could be like 60%, 70% of the entire marketing experience between you and a fan could occur without a website. It could, theoretically. Not that it necessarily will or even should. It's probably going to be a combination of both. You should offer commerce on a more robust platform like Facebook, but you should also offer it on your website, potentially. We're just going to have to wait and see where we end up. But a big thing about why it was kind of misguided to think that everyone was going to, like every company was going to have its own app, is that Pareto distributions apply to every hierarchy, right? Like every single set of things experiences something approximating 20% of the participants getting 80% of the results. And that 20% is like Facebook and Google and Amazon and Netflix, and their apps have billions of dollars behind them, and your app is never going to be as good as theirs. And if you can, if you can outsource the functionality to them, that's better. And it's one of the cons of having a website is you just simply will never have enough money to have a better performing website than Facebook. Never going to happen. forget about it, right? Not even
I
you won't
know.
even come within a mile of being as usable and quick and fast loading and just a joy to experience. And a lot of people don't associate their social media platforms that they use with like usability or fun or, you know, like just really easy to use because it's so easy to use that they don't even notice it, you know?
Yeah, and it starts to become like what happens on there. It doesn't become like, oh, I'm going to look at Facebook now. It's more of a like, this is a habitual thing. And if
Right.
you've watched the most recent season of Black Mirror, I think it's episode 2, where this guy loses his marbles and basically insists on speaking to somebody at the biggest social media company in the world
Right. Yeah,
because
I saw that.
he is addicted and he had a bad thing happen because of that. And like that is true. Like there are certain apps that are almost like native function, right? And especially as like technology develops, like Google Glasses obviously didn't work out, but as
Yeah.
we start bringing in VR and augmented reality and these tools that are wearables, right? And as more and more of these things expand into our lives, you know, being in the places where most people are is going to be required, you know?
Yeah.
And who knows what these social platforms will look like. You know, I just don't see them going away. And I don't see
Yeah.
people being able to catch up. Like this isn't Myspace. You know what I mean? Like we're in well-worn territory now. And
Yeah.
so it's quite interesting to think about how this is going to change over time. But having lots and lots of websites is probably never going to subsidize, right? If anything, online real estate is going to become more and more horizontal, which means that there's going
Yeah.
to be more and more people siloed into their favorite places, and brands are going to want to be there, you know?
Yeah. And it's especially like the usability thing doesn't just hit like how fast your website loads or, you know,
Right.
like how familiar you are with using it. If you think about it, Shopify is already one of these places where you're sort of offloading your website's responsibilities onto a much more capable third party because the Shopify
Right.
checkout experience is not necessarily modifiable by you. They control it. They also do all the payment processing through their systems, and it's just connected to your payment processor. And they store credit card information on their side. Not that you have access to it, but if someone's
Right.
used a Shopify store before, they can just repopulate their credentials on your Shopify site, which is one of the things that makes Amazon the company eater. Because why go fill out your credit card information on some, you know, X trinkets website to get the trinket when that same trinket's available on Amazon
Yeah.
and it's one click? And that's what's
Right.
probably going to, like, as soon as Facebook is going to have e-commerce come out at high resolution because they have the money to make it not shitty at first. Whereas like if it was a
Yeah.
startup, it would be shitty at first and then get better. But it's probably going to be pretty robust when it hits us fully. And you're going to see people's credit card information start to get stored on Facebook at a rapid rate. And then, you know, it's like one-click ordering. Why would you have a website that sells products if you can do one-click ordering on Facebook, which is the same place that you advertise and get the traffic from?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and like I said, like I think, you know, Facebook's obviously just this huge company, right? And with lots of developers. And something that I have always thought about Facebook versus Google, I feel like Google has eaten up lots of little ideas as they went along the way. But like if you want a Google Tag Manager and Google AdSense and Google Analytics and Google Merchant Center and, you know, these different tools and YouTube, right? All of these things that Google makes or owns, you have to like set it up and link them together as if it's not one place, right? They're these
Yeah.
different services. And it's like, I don't understand why the Merchant Center is different from advertising and is different from ad revenue and is different from analytics. Like, how is that? How are those four tools not able to come in together? And it's because these little chunks of the company have been kind of built in silos or acquired from other developers, and they never really bound together. Where I'm always impressed with Facebook is that Instagram obviously has its own presence. And I think there's a reason for that. But they're highly influencing each other, and stealing from Snapchat and then integrating into Instagram and Facebook, right? And so I think there's stuff that Facebook knows the audience just isn't ready for it. And it's not that this stuff isn't developed and that it's not ready to integrate pretty quickly, like relatively as far as development's concerned. I think it's more that they're like, well, we've got this kind of sitting and waiting and we're watching user behavior, and they have so much data that they can kind of make some guesses as to when are people going to be ready for this. Same thing as they did when they rolled out Pages, right? Like they didn't roll out Business Manager and advertising with those pages, but I don't think they made those pages without understanding that that's where that was going, right?
Right.
And same thing with like Messenger and Messenger API. And like they made Messenger its own app before chatbots came on the scene, right? And it's like, well, why would that be? And so I'm saying like, I think that that's something that Facebook does extraordinarily well. And as more and more users come in and we get used to creating our life online and ordering everything online and, building trust online, I think Facebook will just keep rolling out these features that will soon replicate anything else you would do anywhere else online.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting because that's one of the things that goes against like having a website is that like these companies have so much data on use that like if your goal is to accomplish commerce better than they can, good luck. Like they know everything,
Right.
And they have all that money to deal with it. And it's another kind of ties into kind of the last set of cons that I'd like to present, which is that websites cause problems for you and you don't have deep pockets. And I'm not necessarily a conservatively minded person. I'm from Massachusetts, which is like the pinko liberal state. But I do believe that regulation does have a noticeable impact on market participants, meaning if I, as the United States government, decide that you have to comply with all this privacy regulation if you want to have a website, Facebook can afford to do that. You can't.
Right.
So as I try to regulate Facebook, I'm actually just fucking you over.
Right. Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah. Facebook already set aside $3 billion to pay for FTC fines this year. So they've got it, like they're good.
Right.
But it's the little guys that get squeezed out in that scenario. And that's at its beginning. Right? Like it's going to get worse.
Right.
There's going to be further regulations on privacy, not the least of which is Europe's GDPR. And that imposes a cost on every website owner that could be entirely circumvented if you just ditch the website and have a Facebook page, right? Like, I guess that's kind of weird to call it that, but yeah.
Yeah, you almost get these like sources of protection with it, right? So and it goes into exactly what we say with website builders is that the less control that you have, the safer, the harder it is to screw up what they have. The problem is that they don't offer all the things that we recommend. But in the same way, when you start looking at all of the risk and all of the danger, same thing, like I think a good comparison for that is like Teachable, right? Or these course builders that, you go ahead and make your course and, the payment gateway is through them. And if somebody doesn't like the course or asks for their money back, wants a refund, whatever, and they file a dispute with their credit card company, Teachable will say, nope, this user accessed this content, which is what they paid for on this day and accessed this many modules and blah, blah, blah. And like, Teachable will totally go to bat for their accounts, even if like it's a total crap course that doesn't teach anyone anything, And so that person now doesn't have to deal with a chargeback, doesn't have to deal with, if you're using Stripe or PayPal and you get a lot of disputes, they could shut you down. They could keep you from accepting any more payments. With these providers, like that isn't a thing. Like they might shut down your Teachable account, but it doesn't prohibit you from going and making a different account and like starting over, right? So,
Yeah.
whereas Stripe's got your social, so you're done, or your tax
Yeah.
ID, whichever. So I mean, that's the kind of protection that I think there are going to be a lot of people looking for, and I think it's also going to be a little dangerous for us as consumers because, in the same way that people like every week I have to report 5 or 6 fake profiles using my pictures and using my identity to scam people in other countries. Military, I guess, is something that's very exploitive in other places and whatever. And so like I have to constantly ask them to shut that down. Right. So in the same way, and in the same way that Teachable defends their course creators and whatever, Facebook might end up getting their hands mixed into some commerce that isn't safe, right? And so then there'll be even
Right.
more controls put in place, which will put our commerce use of it, even if you're white hat, make it, harder to do and put more restriction in. So it's just this never ending cycle. But, it definitely seems to be going in the direction where someday, and that's not today, but someday,
Right.
you may not need a website, and that's crazy.
It's nuts. Yeah. I mean, just to kind of bring it all back down to the ground, like we could have this we could go back and forth about this. Like if you wanted to be, a little bit more optimistic about having a website in the future, I could tell you, yeah, but search rankings exist and people search. So
Right.
you're always going to need a website. But then I could come back and tell you, well, voice assistants are they're scaling at an incredible rate and they just tell you the answer
Right.
without people having to go to your website. So search might not
Yeah.
be such a viable contention. And then I could counter that. So like, this podcast could be 3 hours long, but ultimately, I think your website's still going to be relevant. It's still going to be incredibly relevant, but its functionality and the things that you need it to do are definitely going to be in flux over the next 10 years.
Yeah,
and there's
agree.
plenty. There's mountains of challenges to the social media empires. They are facing incredible challenges over the next 10 years that a lot of them might not even survive. So it is, as of
Right.
yet, indeterminate whether this death of websites call from all these articles, which I'll put in the show notes, is valid, but it has validity to it. It might not be true, but it is meta true insofar as we can recognize this issue. So it's
Right.
definitely an interesting thing to think about and know about and keep an eye on, because that means your favorite social media platform that you get your traffic from is going to have a lot of cool things to play with in the future. And that's actually going to interact with things on your website. And it's actually an exciting time.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I would say embrace the growth, embrace development, understand that some growing pains come with it, but also it's a better time than ever to filter out duplicating content on your website that exists on your social profiles. I think that,
Yeah.
and creating content that is special for your website, so that you can, gather people's information over there and develop direct contact relationships, right? Because we don't know where all of the control is going to come into play, right? And even if you're like, yeah, I don't need a website anymore because Facebook does all the things I need, but also they're going to charge me to message my direct subscribers, you're still going to want that email list, so you don't really know what's going to happen. So I think it's best to just batten the shutters? Is it batten? Am I making
Batten
up a
down
word?
the
I might be
hatches.
making it.
Yeah. I
Batten
think that's
down.
true.
Okay. Or it's one of those things where it's an audio file thing and you just say what you heard, but it's not the right word. But anyway, I think it's time to, take notice of what's already on your social platforms and hunker down and get all of the, direct contact info you can. I was thinking about this the other day, how much freedom I used to have in the ads platform, when I was advertising for musicians, and I could target any page I wanted to. I could target any competitor I wanted to. I could see all kinds of really finite data on people, and now all that fun is ruined, which is fine. It's still a great platform. We're going to figure it out. But I keep thinking about, which direction is this going to go over the next 5 years, 10 years, it's going to be bonkers.
It will be bonkers. And we haven't even done any talk about, an era when fans are only on phones and not with these big screens. But that's
we're
whole
almost
nother discussion.
there.
Yeah.
We're almost there. There are clients in Indie X who have over 90% of their traffic is mobile.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
which
huge
is
topic.
Crazy.
If we do Artist Website Month again in 2020, we'll definitely touch that because it is another impending doom type of thing. But that wraps Artist Website Month, guys. I think we've done a good job of going over it. There will be training in the Indie Pro member area at some point in the near future in regards to WordPress. I know a lot of people have been asking about that since we did our episode this past week, and that is coming. It's not immediate on our training slate, but it is present 100%. And next month we will have a brand new theme.
Yeah. Well, and so we're not doing a training on artist websites yet, but I'm recording content because I'm building my site from scratch in WordPress. And we're going to be having those videos on the YouTube channel here. So you can watch my growing pains and then Circle come in and be like, here's how you do it fast. And I'll be like, well, damn, I wish I had a training, but now here you go, guys. But I think it's, I've enjoyed talking about artist websites. I think that, I know we didn't give anybody a 1, 2, 3 step. And I think the whole point is that we shouldn't, we gave you some do's and don'ts. We gave you some things that we look for. But I think like doing any kind of hard line, like this is the way to do it, can be difficult, which is why that training is going to be delayed as we figure out more stuff. But do we know what next month's theme is, Sir?
I think we have to have a talk about that. I wouldn't want to call it just yet, but I know what it could be out of 3 things.
One of 3 things, folks. So stay tuned for next week when we determine one of the 3 things.
We'll have a brand new theme announcement next month. New trainings are on their way to Indie Pro, which is very exciting. So definitely lots of stuff coming up. Stick around. And if you haven't gotten your CD Baby tickets yet, but you intend on going, jump on it. You don't have much time left. And you can go to entrepreneur.io/episode 97 for any of the things that we've talked about or that I promise I would put in the show notes. And we will see all of you guys next week on Creative Juice. Can y'all really feel the East Coast, feel the West Coast, say what?